At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Kyle. And again, thank you, gentlemen, for presenting today.
Great, thanks, Jason. That's good instructions, and you have a good system there, and I appreciate your invitation to us. And one thing I forgot to talk about with Jason before we set up, I feel like there's so many details when we do virtual training. Webinars are more work than just grabbing a laptop and projector and coming out to Batavia or Pittsford. I forgot to suggest that we have something of a poll, because when we present on our platform, WebEx, the polls are very awkward and difficult to do, but I think it's a lot easier in Zoom. So maybe what you can do for Jason is write into chat if you are a code official. So if you're not a code official, if you're a member of planning board or zoning board of appeals, don't worry about writing this into chat. But if you are a code official, write into the chat.
Chris,
yes.
Polls are pretty easy. So actually,
sure.
Let me just, it'll take just a few minutes and I'll get that set up, and we can poll the attendees and see what our audience looks like. So.
See what your roles are. That sounds great. So work on that, Jason, and then interrupt me in a couple slides, and we'll see what the result is.
Great.
And we'll take the poll when you're ready. So, but I'll get started in the meantime, this course, and I'll introduce my colleague, Kyle Wilbur, to you. Kyle's going to be speaking in a few minutes, but Kyle, do you want to start off with anything?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, Kyle Wilbur. I wear a variety of hats with the Division of Local Government Services. Chris and I have been colleagues for 15 years. We talk pretty much daily, but we were discussing this morning how we don't think we've ever co-presented on anything yet, although we've been to the same presentations. My programs run parallel and concurrent with Chris's. I manage our local government efficiency grant program, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I also manage 2 federal funding programs that assist communities in 28 upstate counties, 13 in the southern tier, which is the Appalachian region of New York. And we have funding to help with a variety of economic and community development projects through the Appalachian Regional Commission. And then also many of your counties lie within what's called the Northern Border Regional Commission, which is a partnership of New York, Vermont, Maine, New Hampshire. And we receive federal dollars, again, to assist communities, nonprofits, schools, educators, with projects that are, critical to a community's competitiveness. Those programs are intended to help communities that are often overlooked or somehow disadvantaged from other federal dollars. So if you have questions about your eligibility for the Northern Border Regional Commission, I'd be happy to take some of those later maybe. But yeah, so that's me, and I'm on this, I guess, because of the intermunicipal link, because our program supports shared services, and I'm looking forward to it. So thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. So yes, the course is really about one of the programs Kyle manages, local government efficiency. And the goal of local government efficiency is to manage to extend services more with greater efficiency and greater effectiveness through the sharing of services. I'm just going to stop my video so I'm not distracted by myself.
And Chris, we're ready with the poll. So
go for it. Put it up. So this is who we are: municipal code official, planning or zoning board of appeals member, elected official, staff, municipal staff, not a code enforcement official, county staff, county elected official, or other. And for those code officials who are responding, write into the chat if you are the sole code official in the municipality, or if you work for one municipality, or if you're shared between others. How about that? And then we'll take a look at the results of the chat later in the course, and maybe we can discuss some of those arrangements. So I think it's winding up. It looks like most of you, 62%, are members of planning boards and zoning boards of appeals, which is the usual result of our audience, 63%. And then the second most populous category are code officials. And then we have a couple county staff and a couple elected officials and one municipal staff and a couple other. So thank you for that. Thank you for responding, and thank you, Jason, for putting the poll up. That was fun. So, okay, so back to the course. The local governments have, well, I'll go back to the local government efficiency program. The goal, and Kyle can speak more on this, of the local government efficiency program is to deliver services, local services, through a collaboration among municipalities to maintain a level or even improve a level of services while saving taxpayer dollars. And so code enforcement is one of those obvious places where local governments can collaborate to share that service. In a lot of really small municipalities, I know the code official only works a couple hours a week, and sometimes it's hard to find part-time staff. And of course, the code is a lot of information. It's really important that the official in that position be familiar with the Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code, which requires extensive training, which we'll review in later slides. So the Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code is a state law that a local government may enforce itself with its own staff. It may opt out of enforcing and allow the county government, county code officials, or the state, if the county doesn't have a code enforcement program, the state division of, it's the codes division of building standards and codes, has staff across the state who enforce the code for those local governments. The local government can opt back in at any time. And of course, we emphasize here the option to share code officials. The option to contract out with a private firm is one that doesn't eliminate the need for public officers in that position. So the code enforcement officer or CEO, or code official, as we generically refer to them, is the person who's qualified to enforce the state's Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code. And we sometimes refer to those officials as building inspectors, but the term code official is a little more comprehensive because it's really about the Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code, including the property maintenance code. And a lot of the time, the same local official who enforces the uniform code also enforces local zoning and other local laws that might need enforcement. But we refer to the ZEO and the CEO. If we just refer to the enforcement official, we're covering it all. And as I mentioned a little earlier, the code official must be certified after having completed a training course that's more than 100 hours of instruction. And that person has to pass a test to be certified. And 24 hours of in-service credit are required every year. So the code officials here know all this well. And I neglected to mention on the last slide, when a lot of the time the code official is sometimes referred to generically as the building inspector, but there actually is another level of inspector called the building safety inspector, who isn't required the same amount of training as the full-blown code official. But most local governments in New York want to hire a code official who can enforce the entire Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code. There are distinctions between the positions. And sometimes there's a transition between if your code official retires or leaves his or her post, the local government might want to hire someone right away who hasn't received all those hours of training and doesn't have that certification, doesn't yet have that certification. Local governments code officials have about a year to get trained, and it's recommended by the Department of Civil Service that local governments not make their code officials permanent until that candidate has fulfilled the training requirements and become certified by the state. In the photo, some of you might recognize Gary Traver, one of the stars of our codes training program, who is now in oversight. He's head of the oversight division for our codes division, and I think he's retiring at the end of the year. So we're going to be losing a real star trainer and somebody with a lot of institutional knowledge and great experience too. There shouldn't really be a conflict of interest for code enforcement officers, because the code official is ministerial. It's a ministerial position. It's either yes or no to the code, to whether the structure is permitted in a location. If it's not allowed by zoning, or if it's not allowed by, if somebody proposes to build right in the setback, it's the code official has to deny that application. Or if it's not consistent with the Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code, obviously, the code official has to deny the permit. But what if a lot of the time code officials are part-time, and the code official might might work part-time as a contractor for one municipality or another, and if the code official is working in the municipality in which he or she is working as a code official, which might be something that the local government prohibits, if that local government says this is not something that's permissible, our code officials if they're going to work as contractors, they have to do so in other municipalities. That's something that you could do. But one other remedy is to have an agreement with an adjacent municipality to have that municipalities, the code official in that adjacent municipality, issue the permit and inspect the work. And if there is somebody, even if the code official cannot work as a contractor in the municipality in which he or she is working as a code official, that arrangement might be convenient to avoid the code official having to say no to a friend or a relative or somebody close to that person. So having that arrangement, and it should be a written agreement between the municipalities and not just a handshake agreement. Having that arrangement is something that can work to everybody's benefit. And then, of course, if there's a period of time the code official in one municipality is not able to perform his or her functions, then there can be, there's that sharing arrangement. And of course, we're working up to the more official intermunicipal cooperation that Kyle's going to get into now.
Thanks, Chris. I have a question. Is that you in that picture? It looks a lot like you. but maybe not.
I don't think so. I can see if it's pixelated and blurry enough, maybe a little.
It's a little. There's a little resemblance.
I think it's time to replace that to find a better photo. So anybody who has an intermunicipal agreement photo they want to share with us, send it our way. Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Chris. So, yeah, so with our program, and again, this is a real advantage for me to talk to you all, and again, thanks to Jancy Finger Lakes for the invitation. But we see a lot of opportunities for cooperating and sharing in the delivery of many local services. Not just code enforcement. Our programs assist local governments with police sharing, fire district sharing, infrastructure, highway, and those benefits accrue because of cost savings, saving money. With code enforcement, like Chris talked about, and in other areas, sharing and even consolidating services can help meet growing needs and demands, especially for CEOs. Like Chris mentioned, I think the officials on this presentation know about the level of training that's required, and I know locally I've heard where it's not always easy when the code official resigns or takes a job somewhere else. Trying to backfill that position may not always be that easy, and it's also a way. It's an alternative to what Chris has already mentioned, and we'll get into later. It's an alternative to the opt-out provision that local governments are enabled under state statute. So again, it's just an option. Next slide, Chris. So across New York State, local governments are provided very broad authority to work together. And that comes from two areas. The first is Article 5G of the General Municipal Law. And I'm quoting here, 5G states that local governments can enter into, amend, cancel, and terminate agreements for the performance among themselves or for the other of their respective functions, powers, and duties on a cooperative or contractual basis or for the provision of a joint service. So as we all know, state law and state statute often isn't easy to understand. But so what that really means is if you're doing it yourself, you can do it for another local government, either contractually or through a cooperative agreement. The other provision is the state constitution also enables local governments to work together to provide municipal facilities, services, or undertake activities together. Next slide, Chris. So to enter into these agreements, you must consider a few things. The IMA, the intermunicipal agreement, it's important to note that it's not effective until each participating municipality approves it. We see in many cases, like with highways in particular, towns and villages sharing trucks, or the town going into the village to help with a highway project. I remember locally somebody being up in arms because our town's truck was in the village doing work. They didn't realize that the village was in the town, so they were just helping each other out. But in many cases that is informally. We don't recommend informal agreements. We recommend that they be in a written form and reviewed by your municipal attorney.
Kyle, sorry, you've gone on mute. Could you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, there you go. He's back.
Sorry about that, Kyle.
When did I go on mute? I'm sorry.
No, just a few seconds ago.
Okay, so what I was saying is we recommend that these agreements are written and formally adopted. And my point was, Chris and I have the opportunity to travel the state and work with many local governments that have these intermunicipal agreements, and we'll likely be able to unearth examples if you choose to move forward. And to pass these agreements, you must have the approval of a majority of the full voting strength of your governing board. Next slide, Chris. Generally, there are two types of agreements. Service contracts. This is where one municipality contracts with another to provide a service for a stated price. And then service contracts where two or more municipalities join together to provide the service. I'm not sure that there's really one's better than the other. So it's up to you to really decide which process will best meet your needs. Next slide. So I mentioned the formal agreement, and this is where you'll lay out many of the things you see on your screen. And they need to be clear and specific, and the expectation of each party needs to be clear and specific. So what does that agreement need to include? What is the service? And what authority does each local government retain, and what are the terms? Generally, intermunicipal agreements or IMAs are valid for a period of 5 years. They can be extended for other types of agreements like capital and infrastructure. But that's a good thing because we want to make sure that expectations are being met, and those agreements are reviewed over time, and that all parties are happy with the agreement that's been established. What is the scope of service, including how much time is each local government allotted for the service, who is paying for it? We've seen with code enforcement, we also see with similarly with joint assessment that local governments strive to, on the code enforcement side, they strive to try to make their fees as consistent as possible. So, they're all sort of speaking the same language. With property assessment, we've helped counties do reevaluations of parcels to enable, that's often one pitfall to sharing when one county may not be at 100% valuation, but so leveling up or developing some sort of consistency amongst your fees is something to consider. What is the liability of the parties, and do you have the appropriate insurance? And again, the contract term. We discussed a little bit that 5 years is usually a good term, and again, we think that it makes sense to periodically evaluate these so folks are getting the service that they expected. Next slide. So who's doing what? And you all may know some of this better than we do. Out in Western New York, there's a program on the Niagara Frontier Program, which is a contractual process. In this case, the local code officials work full-time for the town, but guarantee a certain number of hours for the village. Here, the town manages all the expenses and bills the village. We were advised when this presentation was put together that some of the benefits include a combined town-village filing system that keeps both parties informed of what's happening in their communities, and the enhanced enforcement has resulted in better assessments and in fact more revenue for the local governments. Next slide. In the Tug Hill, there are local governments that are participating in a shared service agreement where the code official's time is split between the town and the village. Here, the expenses are shared, and they worked out an agreement of who's paying for what. In fact, the village was able to purchase the vehicle for the code official, while the town provides the fuel and insurance. Each party still pays workers' compensation and credits to the state retirement system. So again, they worked out how they wanted to jointly manage this service. Next slide. No, hang on. And then in addition, there were we've heard of other benefits as well. And in this case, over time, the village had been subject to several lawsuits because of improper code enforcement. But since the shared program has been in existence, there's, hasn't been any recent litigation. And we've also heard that the benefits have included enhanced property maintenance, which I think is good for both communities. Next slide. And then south of you all, there's a program in Allegheny County where 12 local governments are participating in shared code enforcement. Next slide, Chris. Under this program, there are 2 code officials. There's one single budget that actually, it's prorated by the number of accessible parcels in each community. Currently, in 2019, that equaled $7 per parcel, and the maximum share that any municipality was paying was $6,000, and the lowest share was $3,000. So a pretty good deal for all 12 municipalities involved. But again, they focused on the management structure, right? So they have a process where they meet twice a year to review how it's going. But one town is the lead. The town of Canandaigua maintains records and coordinates the program. This cooperation is really, we think, helped them, and they've been in discussions about adding a 3rd code official to help cover needs. How do they increase expenses if needed? And how did the fees go back to the local governments where the review is taking place? So some good examples. Again, we can help you all look at these. We're going to get into a few more on the countywide enforcement in a little bit, but I'm going to turn it back to Chris, who's going to take it from here.
Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, this is this one example, the municipal agreement for code enforcement in Allegheny County, was really kind of an extraordinary example of a sharing of services among local governments. The local governments wanted to retain control over the program, even though we all understand, and they probably do too, that these are local governments enforcing a state law. It's kind of a passive activity. They have to enforce the state law. They're not making their own law. That's to be distinguished from zoning. It's the New York State Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code that they're all collaborating to enforce, but they didn't want it to go to the county. They wanted to retain that control, but doing so on a level with the critical mass of all those municipalities. And since we updated the program, one of our colleagues put this program together about 8 or 10 years ago, and we did an update last year and called all the examples to make sure that they were still current, and the Allegheny County example had only grown, and there are more municipalities interested. So it's really saved those local governments money, and the professionals, it's increased the professionalism of the program. So some questions to ask. I'll just go through these few slides quickly because Kyle's really demonstrated the sorting out of some of these questions through the examples that he gave in the previous few slides. These are just important questions that everyone has to be asking. All the parties that are sharing code officials, as they would anybody else, they have to ask who the official employer is and how that person's employment will work with how the benefits will be paid into workers' compensation and state retirement systems, and how training costs because remember, code officials are required to receive extensive training. How will training costs be handled? And then how will the financing of the program be handled? In the Allegheny County example, every municipality paid in, there was an account, and the money for the program comes from that account. But if it's just two municipalities sharing, one municipality might be in a better position, as was the case in both Tug Hill and Niagara Frontier examples, that one municipality might be in a better spot to provide the insurance or provide the vehicle and vehicle insurance. So these are all questions. They're individual to your situation. If you're considering sharing this service with an adjacent local government or with other local governments similar to the Allegheny example, let us know. And these are all questions that everybody has to ask before you set up the program. You just want to, a lot of the time things just fall into place, but you should, if you know of other municipalities that share a code official, you might ask these questions of them. If you don't know of any models, local models, then call our general number or send an email to our general email address, and one of our colleagues in the local government efficiency program can talk to you about these questions and share some examples with you. Residency is something that goes back to public officers law, and of course that stems from the state's interest in local governments employing people who live in that municipality. And if there are obvious reasons why code officials might not want to live in the municipality in which they're working, and we always say that. This is one section of public officers law that some of us feel should be changed, because I know in the municipality, in the small city where I was a municipal planner before I came to the Division of Local Government Services, our code official didn't conduct any business in the city. He lived there, he'd get in his truck and he'd drive 10, 15 minutes out to do all of his shopping and get his car worked on and everything else, because he couldn't do anything locally without getting people, without people swarming around him and asking about city business and their permit application and other things like that. So we all know it's very hard to say no to our friends. And so this is something that you have to remember. It's still a requirement of public officers law. In an intermunicipal agreement, the code officer must live in one of the participating municipalities. Of course, there are exemptions. Cities and villages may pass a local law exempting the code official from residency as long as that person lives in the same county. And in towns, we have in here that the state legislature needs to pass a special law exempting the code official from residency, but I think that might have changed. So if you have a situation like this and you have questions about it, let us know and we'll help you work that out. Private contractors can help code officials, the code enforcement program, for really complex inspections such as power production, battery storage, solar battery storage, and other forms of energy production, which are pretty complex inspections. And there are private firms out there that specialize in some of these inspections. But your local government shouldn't be relying alone on private contractors, because they can't be designated public officers. And only public officers may issue building permits, certificates of occupancy, or orders or appearance tickets, and collect the payments must go to the municipality. They can't go to the contractor. So the contractors have a place in code enforcement, but they can't substitute for your local officials. And ironically, I often say, back in the 1980s, when the Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code was adopted statewide, a number of local governments said, we don't want to bother with that. We don't want to do it. We don't want to enforce the code. Let the county do it. And so there were a number of counties that set up county-wide code enforcement programs where the county did code enforcement, performed code enforcement activities for all or most of the local governments within that county's borders. I think there's another one or two that does in addition to these, plus Wyoming County, which Kyle's going to talk about in just a minute. And what's ironic about this is these are the counties that opted out 30 years ago, 40 years ago, but almost 40 years ago. But they have some of the most effective and efficient code enforcement programs in the state now, because there's a level of professionalism that's able to be achieved and specialization as well among when counties have several staff covering the whole county. And those are full-time employees who are doing the same thing every day. They're not part-time people who have a lot of information to keep track of. I know when I've worked part-time, it's really hard to shift gears. But these county code enforcement programs, from what I understand, are pretty successful. And Kyle's going to speak in just a minute about the one really good example, and not far from where most of you are in Wyoming County. I'm trying to remember, there was another point I wanted to make, but and I think I did say earlier, when a local government opts out of enforcing the code itself, it can opt back in. But these were municipalities that opted out initially, and the counties have kind of, county code enforcement programs have grown over the years, and they've been pretty successful. If I remember the other point I wanted to make, I'll pipe up. But back to you, Kyle.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that previous slide I was looking at, counties have some pretty nice seals and logos that I need to look closer at next time I see them. But yeah, so you didn't have Wyoming. We didn't have Wyoming on that previous slide. Wyoming County, we had invited Wyoming County as well as Otsego County to a recent 2-3 years ago, I guess, our local government innovation conference, which we used to put on in Albany in November up until last year when obviously we stopped. But we had staff from both, and they both came and explained their programs very well. But they're different, right? I think we mentioned in a previous slide, maybe that, or we will, but Wyoming County, they provided information that, they're able to provide this service really at no additional charge to their local governments. While Otsego County, they weren't as successful on that end, and there is a charge that the county has to cover to provide that service. And Chris's point about opting in, opting out, I think in many times they see this as see the program as a good thing, but they're not without their concerns and their issues. Otsego had talked about, would they do it again? They weren't sure, but they're moving forward and it's working well. So let's talk about Wyoming a little bit. Really have enjoyed, the times I've been able to talk to the staff out there about regional services and shared services. But with code enforcement, again, we've mentioned that they don't charge back to the local governments, but they do keep the revenue. But savings have been about $15,000 annually on code enforcement. They have seen revenues go up because of increased consistency. I think one point that Chris and I have talked about, and others, that consistency is also a good thing for development, right? The more consistent the language and the enforcement that we provide to builders, to developers across our municipal boundaries, we think is better, right? The more of a one-stop shop type offering potentially could exceed the benefits to the from cost savings, right? I mean, it's really one code. It should be, not that it's not enforced the same, but it's one code and it should be consistent. And also in Wyoming County, and I know they're working with Genesee Finger Lakes on this, and it was a grant that we helped them with. They've taken building code enforcement and are working to expand it to helping local governments with their zoning administration. You know, municipalities, if they have zoning, they have to enforce the zoning, and that needs to be local, but the county has looked at ways to enhance that and support the local governments as best they can. And when Wyoming County came to our conference and we had the opportunity to talk to the folks there about their program, you know, one thing that they really wanted to drive home, and you know, many code officials are probably doing this, but they've really enhanced their ability to use technology effectively. They've, you know, a lot of their services, you know, are paperless. They have, you know, maps on their iPads, and just the opportunity to share technology and data has really grown under this process. So next slide, Chris.
And I just want to draw attention to this this box. I think they serve 16 towns and 7 villages, all the municipalities except one village. And I know they were talking about that last village considering joining on when that village's code enforcement officer retires. So they might have all of them soon. And Kyle, you made me remember that point that I wanted to make, which was that there's a great savings when in those Allegheny County towns that participate in that collaborative enforcement program, they're spending a lot less on code enforcement than they would if they all had their own code officials. And I want to underscore the point that Kyle made a few minutes ago about Wyoming County. Wyoming County does this at no cost to the local governments. The county keeps the permit fees, but the local governments in Wyoming County don't pay into the program. That isn't the case in every county that does countywide code enforcement, but that's a pretty compelling argument.
You can go to the next slide.
Go beyond this one?
Yeah, we pretty much covered this.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, it's been a pretty general overview of sharing code enforcement, you know, but just to reiterate the benefits, again, and it's not only the benefits in this function, but across multiple functions when you're sharing services, we believe. Enhancing expertise and experience might be even more important. I'm the son of a town supervisor, sit on many local organizations, and I always say our bullpen is not always deep for folks that want to get involved in municipal services or community organizations, right? So the more we can leverage existing staff and share them across municipal boundaries, we think makes sense. One point Chris made about hiring private assistance, you know, there's also an opportunity if we have regional programs to enable staff to specialize in certain types of activities, you know, in this case, whether it's solar expansions or other types of new types of development, you know, that could be a benefit as well. And just the opportunity to share excess staff time is of value. And, you know, I'm giving a lot of examples from other services, but, you know, maybe having one part-time staff person, you know, there's not enough work to justify a full-time position, professional position, but if you share, maybe you can get to that level and you know, and hire somebody full-time. And the example I was going to give, we know that wastewater operators, right there, and water treatment and public water operators, you know, the median age of those folks is not very young, and, you know, the numbers are like, you know, 20% or 25% will be retiring in that function. We've worked with places to consolidate infrastructure, and by doing that, there's an opportunity to make that operator position more lucrative for younger folks to stick around. I remember seeing in the Parade magazine a long time ago that a wastewater operator in Arizona's salary was like $110,000 to $120,000 because of the size and scope of the system, right? So there is an opportunity to create a benefit to potentially keep folks in the region by making the job a little larger and more lucrative for in salary and those types of things. So that's next slide, Chris. I don't know if there's any question, anything you want to add on codes before we go into how we can help?
I don't have anything to add, but with the few slides we have left, I think we'll have a few minutes for questions if anybody's written anything into chat. So
okay, so
wrap up here.
Yeah, so we're fortunate to be able to have a relatively small grant program called the Local Government Efficiency Program. And the goal of that is to provide incentive funding to municipalities to implement shared services or consolidation type projects across all local government functions. And in this case, if you were considering code enforcement, we could help develop the structures of sharing and intermunicipal agreements, help you look at the fee structures of your partner local governments to see if you want to change those. So there's a variety of things we can do under the LG program. It's competitive. It's funded through the consolidated funding application, which just was released yesterday. So in case you haven't seen that, that's the state's consolidated program for many of the grants available to local governments and other organizations. So that's out. The deadline will be in July. We can talk more about that offline later. But Chris mentioned at the start that we really want to incentivize opportunities for financial savings and other types of efficiencies. Next slide, Chris. These are our funding caps. We can fund $100,000 in planning projects. That's capped at $12,500 per municipality. So if you have 8 local governments involved, you can get $100,000 for a planning project. The match for that is 1-to-1. So for every dollar we return, you need to match that with $1. And then implementation funds are capped at $1 million per project, $200,000 per municipality, and that's a 90-10 state-local split. Next slide. And I think this is it for the presentation, but really any entity that is helping local governments or providing local government services to constituents, taxpayers are eligible for our program, including regional planning boards, which is a nice boon for them, because we know that, again, in the case of Wyoming County, Genesee Finger Lakes, I'm pretty sure was the applicant to help them look at expanding their code program to other functions. So a broad array of eligible entities are eligible for or can apply to our program. So again, it was released yesterday. You have until the end of July to submit an application. And if you do, good luck. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you both, Christopher and Kyle, for a really informative presentation. I learned a lot myself today, so I hope folks found it useful. I haven't seen any questions in the chat just yet, but I had a comment and a question of my own. I guess just given my experience, I had the privilege of working for both the city of Rochester for several years, and then more recently, the town of Danby in Tompkins County, and having that sort of two ends of the spectrum, a city of 210,000 people to a town of 3,500 people, really provided me some really great insights into local government in New York and at various levels. And I worked at the zoning, the permit counter at City Hall in Rochester, and one of my typical spiels for folks coming to get a permit was the distinction between the state building code and the local zoning code. And you know, it's kind of an arcane distinction that the average citizen doesn't really understand, doesn't care about. They just want to do their project. And so, because we attempted to set up a one-stop shop at City Hall where my colleagues would administer the building code, but we would also, my immediate colleagues would administer the zoning code. And anyway, I bring this up just to sort of raise the issue of these codes, especially the building code. If you've ever looked at it, it's like multiple phone books thick, and that reference is getting really dated because probably folks under 30 won't know what a phone book looks like anymore anyways. But it's a very it's a very thick document, and I have a great deal of respect for building code enforcement officials because they have a lot of information to work with. And if you add the zoning code on top of that, it just it's a whole other level of regulation. And so even in the town of Danby, 3,500 people, we split it up. We had a full-time, the town had recently gone to a full-time code enforcement officer, and part of my role as town planner was to be the zoning enforcement officer. And the two of us work closely together on projects, but it's certainly a challenging dynamic from all levels. And I think that speaks to, you know, if a single municipality does not have the resources to, you know, have the level of staffing and you know, professional training, you know, sharing services like Chris and Kyle described, I think is an excellent way to go. And Wyoming County has been an interesting project working with them. I think we're probably going to try and do a session on the fall local government workshop just about the experience Wyoming County has had recently with moving zoning enforcement to the county level. So look forward to that. But I'm going to check the chat room now and see if we have any
Jason,
any
this
other questions.
while you're checking, your comments about the departments made me think of the cartoon that is in our copy room that nobody's seen for the last year. But I'm not sure what script it is, but it's like 6 different scenes, and the applicant starts in the planning office and then gets referred to the zoning office, then gets referred to the economic development office, and then by the end he's back to the planning office, right? You know, I think a lot of us have probably seen that one, but your points are well taken.
No, yeah, exactly. And you know, my you know, as a public servant, one of my guiding principles was always to make this process as easy as possible for the citizen that came in to try and do projects. And unfortunately, local government, well, government in general, does not always share that that objective, or seems to not at certain times. And so you know, I always tried to you know, educate folks and explain, you know, uniform fire prevention and building code, that's a state law that the city administers. But the zoning law is a city law that the city administers. But you know, again, somebody trying to build a deck off the back of their house, they don't really care. You know, they just want to get their permit and be able to build their deck. And you know, unfortunately, for better or for worse, I mean, you know, the codes are there for good reason. But you know, we collectively as a society have made some of these things awfully complex at times. And so that was what, you know, part of my role was to make that, to try and clarify that for folks. And now that I'm at the Regional Planning Council, I hope to be able to help our municipalities do that as well for their constituents. So I did have one question. I didn't get to my own question on, Chris, I think on a slide you were talking about, you mentioned residency requirements for code enforcement officers, and that I would love to get more information on that and confirm that for towns, because I know when I worked for the town of Danby, we were hiring a new code enforcement officer, and nobody at the town seemed to be aware of this requirement, and we were, reviewing resumes from several folks and interviewing several folks that did not live in the town. The good news is we ended up, our final candidate that we selected does live in the town, so that's good news. But I was unaware of that provision.
Yeah, I think that I was really surprised to see that detail about residency for towns, that it requires an act of the state legislature, because usually when the state has exempted one kind of position and one kind of local government from that residency requirement, it applies to all of those positions for all of that same kind of municipalities. So I think if there's a specific issue, I'll take it to our attorney if you have one individual who has that question. But I am pretty sure, I won't say with 100% certainty, but I'll say with more than 50% certainty, I'm mostly certain that a town can refer to public officers law to the exception for a code official in that town or a code official working in that town who doesn't live in that town that was made previously. That exception applies as well to other towns. I see there are a couple other questions, and with only a few minutes left, maybe we should look at a couple of those.
Carl, you had an interesting question. You're working for 2 towns and 2 villages. Boy, yeah, I would 60 hours a week is, what would the advantage be to consolidation? My immediate response, and Chris and Kyle jump in, would be, if those municipalities consolidated into one shared position, then you would be a full-time public employee and hopefully work a more typical work week, 40 hours, and be eligible for full-time benefits. But Chris or Kyle?
I agree. That's my answer too, Jason. It seems like, yeah, that's exactly, maybe this code official working for these municipalities has done so in kind of a disjointed way, not to say that that's a bad thing, but as those municipalities have hired that code official individually and not as a collective, and they could probably, if they were all to work out an agreement, they could probably provide more coordinated and better benefits to benefits to this code official. Kyle, do you have anything to add?
No, not really. I mean, I remember having discussions with a gentleman in my county who was a code official for part-time contractual for multiple municipalities, and those are some of the things he was talking about when he came to us about a consolidated program of some sort. So yeah, and I would also, I guess anecdotally a little bit, I mean, economies of scale, cooperating together has benefits to the local governments, right? A more coordinated shared program, maybe there's resources you can share better versus just hiring one code official independently. Would seem to be there.
I mean, from the, to play devil's advocate, I could imagine from the standpoint of the municipalities, they may like having individual part-time employees so they don't have to pay, the same kind of benefits. I guess longer term, that raises the question of, attracting qualified, individuals to staff these positions. But again, I've observed that not every municipality really always wants very rigorous code enforcement, and that's the unfortunate reality of sort of the of where we are in some places. So yeah, But good question, Carl, and thanks for attending. You might win the prize for furthest attendee. I think you're out in the Catskills, so so thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I saw that.
I just thinking too, maybe there's benefits of sort of transition too, right? I mean, if you contract with somebody, they may say, I'm retiring at the end of my term in December, right? And then you're stuck trying to find somebody to fill their position. So if you have a coordinated program, you might be able to ensure some sort of transitional
A succession plan.
Thank you. I couldn't
Smoother succession. Yeah.
I was stuck on transitional, but I meant succession.
Me too.
So
Well, there's a really good question here before we wrap up that I'm gonna just speak to very quickly.
Go ahead.
The question is, what are our opinions on villages needing planning boards, separate planning boards and zoning boards of appeals, or can villages and towns share boards? The best scenario is if there's a village and town planning board and a village and town zoning board of appeals, so that the village and town have combined boards, but two boards, planning board and zoning board of appeals. Consolidating boards into one is not advisable, because having those functions separate, because the zoning board of appeals is like a court, is the best way to go about your planning and zoning administration.
I would concur with that, and I just have a quick story on that. The other benefit I have seen is that it encourages the village and town to work together. I have a planner friend who lives in a village and was asked to be on the town planning board, and the town supervisor said no, he's a resident of the village, not the town. And actually, residents of villages are also residents of the towns the villages within. So I think consolidating the boards gets helps overcome that sense of division when it comes to land use planning. So.
Well said. There was a question or a comment by Harriet Haynes. Hi, Harriet, Seneca County Planner, which has a countywide code enforcement program. She suggests that there's generally interest in seeing zoning approval before building permits, and of course that makes perfect sense. And when those functions are combined, as Wyoming County is working toward, there's all the greater ability. So maybe Seneca County and others want to think of that. And this is really something that I think we're going to see more of. I know there's been some interest in one of the counties in the Catskills. There are rumblings out there among the counties in the state. We get these questions every few months. There seems to be a little bit of interest in countywide code enforcement, but change takes a long time. So I think I'm going to let Jason wrap us up, because he and I are going to be on in half an hour again or sooner.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I could talk about this sort of local government stuff all afternoon, but unfortunately today is our one double header of sessions for the spring local government workshop. So Chris and I, and maybe some of you, will be returning at 1 o'clock for a short session on the new marijuana law and local government implications on that. So thank you again, Chris and Kyle. Great presentation. Thank you all for attending today. And again, if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to